Hey guys, and welcome back to ScarletSprites. It's been a little while since I purchased Kraut Buster for Neo Geo. And this is a run-and-gun Metal Slug type game from the NG Dev team. Now, most Neo Geo fans are aware of NG Dev because this group has focused on creating new games for the Neo Geo hardware and have released titles on both the MVS and AES systems. Games like Gunlord, Neo XYX, and Last Hope all come to mind. To expand beyond the more niche Neo Geo crowd, they began offering some of these games up on Dreamcast as well, including Last Hope and Fast Striker. Flash forward to current times, and they're not doing Dreamcast versions of their games anymore. I suspect that's due to piracy, but they have offered up some great versions of Gunlord and Razion for the Nintendo Switch. So I suspect a lot of people are now discovering NG Dev because of that fact. But Kraut Buster is the latest Neo Geo release from these guys, and it's also the only game I've ever owned from NG Dev. The Neo Geo games, as you might expect, aren't cheap. It's been so long that I can't even really remember what this actually cost when it sold as a pre-order. I want to say it was around $500 US, but you can correct me in the comments if I'm off on that. And that really raises an interesting question. Is spending that kind of money on a modern Neo Geo game worth it? And this is where things get a little difficult, I think, and everyone is going to have their own unique perspective on this, and no opinion is wrong in this case. Back when I was working on completing the Neo Geo MVS collection, a few people would always ask, are you getting the NG Dev games too? So the fact that someone even asks that is indicative that these games are different, and they are. They aren't part of the original catalog. So I'll stop there because that's likely the first point you may or may not agree with. NG Dev games are not part of the original legacy of the Neo Geo. Now they certainly help to have that legacy live on today, but they have their own history in my opinion, and that history is unique and special. But I don't value that the way I do original games for the Neo Geo. Dropping $500 on something like, say, a Zupapa kit just means a little bit more to me. The game, I grant you, might not be as good as an NG Dev title, but from a collectability standpoint, it's part of the Neo's history, and I personally place a higher value on that than I do modern runs of titles. There is no doubt a charm to having a new Neo Geo game that comes prepped and ready to play on original hardware though, and in fact there are a lot of people who value this, and the scarcity of the NG Dev games often run them into the four-figure mark. Clearly, there is a market for them beyond people like myself, who lean a little bit more heavily towards the original family of games for the Neo Geo. Ultimately though, I was pretty happy when I finally received my MVS copy of Kraut Buster. Like I mentioned earlier, it was my first NG Dev game. It was a new Neo Geo game, and I got in early enough that I didn't have to pay those four-figure sums that these games often command on the secondary market. It's undoubtedly modeled after Metal Slug. It features some incredible in-game artwork, and the overall scenery of the game is pretty charming. The game features these masks as different types of power-ups for your character, which is a neat but somewhat underutilized feature of the game. And perhaps best of all, the game plays pretty fluidly. There's no control issues or anything like that, at least not that I experienced in my playthroughs. But I have to be honest here. Despite all of those positives, I was often left feeling pretty lukewarm about the game. In fact, I started thinking to myself that if I wanted to play Neo Geo, and I wanted a Metal Slug experience, why wouldn't I just simply play one of the 5 Metal Slugs actually on the Neo Geo? Those are the games that I love and have nostalgia for. And this goes back to the feeling that I mentioned earlier. I don't have any sentimental ties to Kraut Buster like I do the actual Metal Slug series. So by absolutely no fault of its own, Kraut Buster just isn't ticking that nostalgia box for me. It's not able to fulfill one of the reasons I actually play Neo Geo in the first place. So again, it's not that Kraut Buster is a bad game, it's that it's a somewhat average game that mimics something great that I already love on multiple levels. And maybe that's a little unfair, and for me, Kraut Buster didn't have a fair chance from the start. I don't know, but I played through this time and time again, trying to sell myself on it to see if I could get myself hooked, and ultimately, I was always left with the same question. Why did I spend $500 on something that I'm not really enjoying and which holds very little intrinsic value to me? Now, I'd be very happy to spend, say, $40 on a physical cartridge of this for a more modern console, or even maybe a little less than that for digital. And it was about this time that I saw Gunlord was being ported to the Nintendo Switch, and Razion. And now I'm starting to wonder to myself, how long until Kraut Buster gets moved over there too? Could I potentially be left with a $500 cartridge for something that I don't really appreciate in its existing format, but which I might be happy to have to play elsewhere? So now I'm really starting to second guess my decision to buy Kraut Buster in MVS format for the Neo Geo. And here's where it became time to truly face reality. A Capcom Big Blue cabinet became available for me to grab and add to my arcade collection. This is an iconic cabinet from the 90s that I've always wanted to eventually have to house my CPS2 setup. And here it is, available for the taking. Now, the cabinet cost more than what Kraut Buster did, but on the secondary market, people were already paying nearly double what I initially spent on Kraut Buster. So in short, Kraut Buster was now worth what the Capcom Big Blue cabinet was worth if I wanted to sell it. So ultimately, do I want a copy of Kraut Buster for Neo Geo, or do I want a Capcom Big Blue cabinet? And when I began looking at it from that perspective, well, I sold it for significantly more money than what I paid for it and turned it into one of my dream arcade machines. So yes, I have not owned Kraut Buster for quite a while now, and that's why the footage you're seeing isn't sparkly crisp from the RetroTink 5X. These captures were done on the 2X Pro more than a year ago. I want to be clear again that I don't think Kraut Busters is a bad game. I think just for my own personal tastes, I'm perfectly fine playing independently developed games like this on a more modern platform. I don't need them to be retrofitted for an era that has long since passed, and I certainly don't need to pay a premium for that experience. And this was a good learning experience, and it taught me something about myself and what I truly value in modern gaming and collecting. Now, I do own both Gunlord and soon Razion for the Nintendo Switch. I hope that someday in the near future I'll be able to re-experience Kraut Busters on a modern device as well, but until that time, I'm perfectly happy playing what I have at a more budget-friendly price for the Nintendo Switch. And I realize that not everyone shares that same opinion, but I definitely welcome your perspective on these types of games in the comments. I want to thank you so much for listening to me rant a little bit today. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will catch you all next time. Later, guys.